Welcome back. This is another installment of MustardHub Voices Behind the Build. In these episodes, I sit down with the people building, backing, and running better workplaces. I'm your host, Curtis Forbes. My guest today is Stephen Candelmo. Stephen's a corporate attorney and entrepreneur with nearly 3 decades of experience and more than $3 billion in transactional work across IPOs, mergers and acquisitions, private equity, and venture capital. He is named inventor on several patents and the co-founder of 2 venture-backed software companies, FedBid and Synapsify. Today he serves as outside general counsel for private technology companies and for As a Friend Capital Partners, a deep tech venture fund. He is a frequent industry speaker and published author on the legal and business challenges facing tech companies. Graduate of University of Maryland, University of Akron School of Law, and Georgetown University Law Center. Stephen is the founder and CEO of Paralex, which is reimagining legal services through technology for small businesses and franchises. And that includes its newest product, FDD Hub, the franchise industry's first disclosure platform built for engagement. Welcome to Behind the Build. Thanks for joining me today, Stephen.
Thanks, Curtis.
Did I get all of that? Isn't it cool hearing back everything and you're like, wow, yes, I did all of those things.
Yeah. Sometimes you question like, what have I actually done? But then when you actually can sit back and hear it, it's like, interesting. That's pretty good.
Yeah. So, but before we dive into anything, you and I, we owe this kind of whole conversation to Paul O'Brien, right? The way you two met's kind of a story in itself, in an airport, and now here we are. Walk me through that briefly.
Yeah. So I live and work in the Austin, Texas area, and I was scheduled for a flight leaving to Pittsburgh to visit my niece who's graduating law school. But as things have often been occurring, there was a delay on the tarmac, so we sat on the plane for a while, and we decided actually we're going back. I'm like, oh my god, it's going to be a horrible travel day, right? Because all the connecting start falling down via dominoes, right? So with that said, I had a friend that was on the flight as well, who just by coincidence. So we walked off the flight, and I saw him talking to Paul, who I've never met. So I went up and just introduced myself. Said, "Hey Tim, what's going on? It's great to see you here. Funny coincidence, And he just then said, "Hey, I'll introduce you to Paul." And Paul, that's it. And he goes, "What do you do?" And I go, "Oh, this is what I do." "Oh, I got someone. You have a card?" I go, "I actually do have a card." And he goes, "I have to introduce you to Curtis." I'm like,
yeah.
And that's how it happened.
Cool. And the rest is history.
Yeah.
So you spent 3 decades as a corporate attorney.
Yeah.
Billions of dollars in deals, IPOs, M&As, the works.
Yeah.
That's kind of first of all, that's a career in and of itself. And I think it's a lot that, most people would just happily ride off into the sunset. But I want to know what pulled you out of that and into building software.
Yeah. Well, that really started in 2009. Well, let's take a beat back. I started off my career in the late 90s, really at the boom of the internet, and everybody was taking companies public, and e-commerce for pet food and everything else in between. And I had a dear friend who was starting a company, and he became a client. And at that point, he says, "Why don't you come on and be full time?" And I was working at my large national law firm for several years, and I decided, I think try this. So we went out. There was 4 of us, and really we all sat in a room helping to develop this brand new software for the federal government. And that really started it all. That really started my entrepreneur bug, and went back to the practice of law after that. Sometimes we learn from things that aren't the great successes, but we
Yeah.
learned so much from that process. Raised venture capital, had 40 plus employees, and we just could not get it to the next stage. We sold it, and I went back to the practice. So that almost gave me the taste of entrepreneurship, even though I'm representing entrepreneurs for most of all my career. So once you have that taste, you're always looking for the next thing.
I feel it.
So, right. So several years later, I started a company called Synapsify that was doing some interesting machine learning around social media, text, high volume customer signal data, raised some venture capital behind that, try to apply some of the lessons that we learned before. And then, you know, it's a high risk business whenever you're starting a new business.
Hmm.
Has some modest success, but not, wasn't a home run. Then went back to the practice. And so once you have that entrepreneur spirit, and then it was primarily in software, that has always stayed with me.
Yeah.
And hence, we'll discuss later in terms of Paralex and FTD Hub. But so it's always been this reoccurring theme that has been in my journey, right? As
Yeah.
an attorney and entrepreneur.
I
Yeah.
feel like, a lot of founders have those moments where it's that thing that kind of makes them say, someone has to fix this. And I think that like once you get that taste of it and you're like, I can be the one to fix that. Wait a minute. I can do this.
Yeah.
Every time you sort of see that, right? Every problem you identify, all of a sudden becomes like an opportunity you're vetting, right? In the back of your mind. So let's talk about Parallax, right? So for
Yeah.
somebody hearing that name for the first time, what is it? What problems are you, setting out to solve?
Yeah. So as a result of my last startup, I almost promised myself if I ever had a chance, I would probably do something in the legal space because that's what I know, really.
Yeah.
Um, and I really saw an opportunity, given the advancements of AI, to how could we solve the problem that 60% of all small businesses never use an attorney. And you could probably guess why, right? We're just too darn expensive and we're too slow and so forth. So, what if we could apply AI into that workflow where there's still an attorney in the loop, but they are at the end where the AI is doing the intake, the AI is doing the drafting, AI is doing the revisions, everything that we take for granted. But this was a couple years back when ChatGPT just released. And I just started developing this platform to really address that gap in the market. And as a result of being able to drive these efficiencies in the workflow, uh, the legal hourly rate somewhat fades away, and you could charge on a fixed fee basis and still make hopefully a healthy margin. So Parallax really arose out of that thesis. How can we develop a platform to solve this inherent problem in delivering legal services at somewhat in a more efficient manner and potentially at scale? Because there's only a solo attorney or small firm can only service so many
Yeah.
clients. So how can you expand that base? So that's where it started, um, and really Parallax has been focused on developing you know legal technology solutions that solve real business problems, and that was a real business problem.
Yeah.
Make it more accessible and more efficient.
Yeah, I would probably agree with that. It's a crazy statistic, right? 60%. I mean, that's the reasons are obvious, and it's surprising that there aren't more people kind of tackling that. AI is obviously solving, a lot of the for better or worse, right? I mean, AI is not perfect, right? And it gets a lot of things wrong.
Yeah,
But it certainly has. I love how when you describe the problem, you also group yourself into that, like we're too slow, we're too expensive. But I mean, the reality is right. That's what the legal world is.
it is, and it has grown off the back of the hourly rate, and those hourly rates continue to go up higher.
Yeah,
and in terms of my view of where the industry is going and the future of work in the legal industry, um, I just think that there's some areas of the law that are just going to get compressed from a business model perspective because AI is just so much better in terms of driving efficiencies. And ultimately, there's a collision in the market, right? The hourly rate is based on the simple premise, the more hours you incur, the more money I make.
Right.
But then you
Right.
have a technology that says, well, you can actually achieve that task without spending as much time. So therefore, it's less money. Yeah, just that's probably not going to be the case. And as a result, the role of an attorney in some practice areas is just going to change. That could be something more of an orchestrator of agents, an overseer of the actual end product or deliverable, because you still need
Right.
accountability, you still need fiduciary obligations, confidentiality, work product, all of these ethical things that will never go away. And
Correct.
if anyone thinks that the lawyers are just going to go away and be replaced by AI, it's not going to happen to the extent that people are sometimes putting out there. But
To the
it's
extent, yeah, no, for sure. And
yeah,
if folks aren't paying attention to all of the legal blunders people are experiencing by relying on AI, you know, they should check some of those out so they can rethink rethink their AI only strategy.
yeah. But with the fact that these foundational models are getting so good,
Yeah,
just
they
think
are.
about the advancements that has made since November of 22, what they can do. Um, I think I've come to the realization that that 60% number doesn't really effectively get reduced by AI. Why? Because that very thing, that very tool that can drive those efficiencies, that can get you to good enough, is
Mhm.
in the hands of these clients or these small business owners.
Yep.
And I think that's the one aha moment that I've thought about as to by just simply reducing price does not get you more customers, especially when the capability is in the hands
Yeah.
of the ultimate
Right.
customer to have a contract reviewed or highlight issues and so forth,
Right.
right? So,
Well,
yeah,
I think that for the longest time, right, or really for forever in history, the two things that ultimately governed, um, or I should say, almost even enabled these kinds of hourly salaries or whatnot was knowledge, the exclusivity of knowledge, right, and the uh, barrier to entry right there, and then capital or access to capital, right? Those are the two things.
yeah.
And AI is essentially infinite knowledge, right, for zero cost. So what you've done is essentially eliminate that barrier entirely. And so I think what you're talking about, I think makes a lot of sense to me. And one question I think that I would have is that you've spent 3 decades on the inside doing this big, complex legal work.
Yeah.
I'm curious what you saw from that vantage that kind of convinced you. And let's be clear, right? I mean, in this field, especially in the legal field, you get comfortable for how services get delivered, right? It's always been done this way. It's very comfortable, right? So, what did you see from that vantage that convinced you that technology could actually change how the services get delivered, not even just make them a little faster?
Um, I well, despite the despite in my area of practice, and I'm only going to give my opinion regarding corporate law, right?
Mhm.
You think that there's a complexity of all the different types of issues and variability and everything, or if you're buying and selling a business, it's highly complex. It's highly uh, dependent on all of these things that have to come together in order to successfully close a deal. But if you're in the space long enough, there's just a lot of standardization. Like good quality contracts generally look the same,
Right.
except maybe 10% of them. A merger agreement for a $10 million deal looks generally the same as a merger agreement for a $100 million deal. And all the paperwork that has to get done is generally the same. Now, the details within that could be different. There could be some particular things that are applicable to industry, regulatory issues, and so forth. But the mid-market stuff, where I'm operating from, there there is an inherent acknowledgement of, if anything is somewhat standard, that means that you can apply a system to it, and thereby apply a system that can somewhat handle those parts that are not standard, uh, which is a rather relative small percentage. So even though it's complex in terms of, you know, dollar value, the stakes, the consequences, and so forth, there's a certain heuristic of, from a corporate law documentation standpoint, that anything that's relying on documentation, that doesn't really change much. So if that's the case, well, why can't we just apply a system to eradicate some of the friction that's involved in just working as an
Yeah.
attorney? And if you can remove that friction, you're removing time. If you're removing time, you're reducing cost. If you're reducing cost and time, you then can possibly narrow down the window of estimated time equal to estimated value, and hopefully be able to price where the service can still be delivered, the judgment can still be shared, but there's still a margin, right? So that's what I saw, given my experience of, okay, what are we really dealing here with,
Yeah.
right? I'm Whenever there's shuffling of paper and the paper is generally the same,
Yeah.
well, there's some things that you can drive some efficiencies to.
I I want to get into FDD Hub, but before we do, I want to lead into it, right? Because I know that, when we talk about AI, when people hear AI in legal, right, they either get super excited, they get super nervous.
Yeah.
Right, about the hype, right? Lawyers being replaced, all these things, and there's someone who's spent maybe their whole career in this profession. I'm curious how you actually think about where AI helps, and where you can see how I'm sort of I'm bridging this into FDD Hub, right? But I'm
Okay.
curious where you think it actually helps, and maybe where it doesn't.
Yeah. It clearly, again, it clearly can help initially be used as a tool to help identify issues, to help suggest uh, revised language, to be able to somewhat accelerate you know your time to get through some of the things that are maybe more rudimentary,
Yeah.
but the higher complex judgment valued advisory strategic work, um, ultimately you're still applying your judgment anyway, right? When you're speaking to a client as to how things work and so forth. I'll give you an example. So, you know, using AI to initially redline an agreement, fantastic.
Yeah.
You can decide whether that you are putting that into the agreement. You can be able to revise it. It just gives you this this ability to do something that would typically take you an hour, and you can get it done in 20 minutes and then deliver it, in a quality fashion. Where it doesn't help is clients still have interactions with other humans, and interactions between humans can get messy. Interactions can, particularly whenever you are, quote, trying to complete a deal, right? Trying to get two people to come together in consensus to either sell their business, buy their business, do a license something that's of high value. The human interaction is somewhat unpredictable, but the value of someone who's been practicing for 30 years is my own pattern recognition of all of those interactions, knowing where deals possibly could fall apart, sensing where the other side is, being proactive and trying to address something that could derail the parties from coming together, or raising an issue that is more nuanced than a black and white answer, right? AI really doesn't do that, you know. So I was on the phone with a client the other day, and there were some issues in connection with this transaction, and you could just sense the other side is getting antsy, getting a little anxious, but at the same time advocating for your client to say, regardless, to be fully protected, you need to be, standing firm on this issue. Sure. And then intermediating between those two points of tension is something that is human based.
AI cannot do that.
There is no AI that's sitting in between these two parties to either ease fears or to recommend where a bright line needs to be, because it's just so experiential, and we as humans are subject to our own emotions, our own ups and downs. But given that I've experienced that as 30 years of negotiating, 30 years of fostering deals, you can't replace that pattern matching, right? So that's a different thing. I don't think AI will help, or knowing when a litigator knows when he or she has gotten the attention of the jury. Right. They see it in their eyes. They see it in their posture. They see it's something. It's a different, that's where I think it doesn't help.
Yeah. That's really interesting. And you're describing everything that really, that the technology can't, or at least to this point, right? It hasn't built any capability to interpret human-like signals that are like nonverbal. Essentially, kind of what you're talking about, and that kind of nonverbal communication. That's gonna take a little while. I want to get into FDD. It's brand new. A lot of our audience knows franchising. They may not know what FDD even is. So set the table for us. What's a franchise disclosure document? Why does it matter so much?
Yeah. So the franchise disclosure document, or otherwise known as the FDD, is a legally required disclosure document that the franchisor, ZOR for short, is required to share with every prospective purchaser of their brand. Consider it a prospectus. They're about to make a serious investment, one of maybe the largest investments in their life, whether they're going to go buy and open up a Jimmy John's or something like that. And this document has to be delivered to them 14 days before they sign on the dotted line. In certain states, you have to actually you have to register that document and get it approved by 14 states in the United States. They're called registration states. And It is what you would think a prospectus would be. And that is, it's typically 300, 400 pages long. It's some brands, it can be 700 pages long. It has a standardized set of standardized information that a franchisor is required to give to every prospect. And then all the various exhibits in which the franchise prospect would have to sign to become a franchisee. So it is there to protect the potential buyer, right? So everything is laid out, but it's so long and it's so intimidating.
It is.
It has become somewhat of the known secret that upon disclosure of the FDD, that's where prospects and sales go to die, right? So the FDD is, but you can't avoid it. Has to be disclosed, has to be shared, and depending on your process at a franchise, they have a variety of different ways of how they try to address it, right? They may say, hey, let's schedule a meeting. I'm going to be sharing with you my FDD. Let me tell you what it is. Let me tell you things you should focus on. Almost like prepping them, right? So it just doesn't land with such a thud.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
what is this? And then they typically have a post review meeting or maybe a webinar to answer any questions. But most people are so, you know, deer in the headlights of like, I'm not really sure.
Yeah.
Or do I have to hire an attorney to go look at this? But
Right.
I'm not really sure if I want to buy your brand or not. And to be honest, I'm so tailored to watching little TikToks and short videos and everything else. And you're asking me to read a 350-page document. I don't even read anymore. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. I know.
you know,
Exactly.
right? So it's become it's a required piece of disclosure, but often viewed as one of the most burdensome. So
You've described FDD Hub as the first FDD platform that's built for engagement, right? Which is an interesting phrase to attach to a legal document. So
yeah,
what do you mean by engagement? Why has it been missing until now?
well, I so when I say engagement, it's really about the experience of reading this document, the experience of more easily understanding this document. And for the past several decades, when people receive this document, the FDD, it's typically sent to them via a PDF, via an attachment of an email, or it's sent through a Dropbox link type of system like
Okay.
HubSpot. You can attach the link, but you're just generally
Mhm.
downloading the PDF, right?
Yeah.
um, and because of that, and the way it's delivered and the form it's delivered, and because of this significant impact it has on sales, it explains why, from an industry perspective, uh, the we call it the middle of the funnel, the part where the the prospect is receiving the FDD is typically one of the largest drop offs in the sales funnel
Yeah.
for
It's
brands,
crazy.
right? It makes
Yep.
sense, right? Because I
Yeah, I serve you with a 350-page document. I don't think I'm going to hear from you again.
like I don't even know where to start. And then but here's the flip side. For those who are really serious, they don't even read it. And then what does that do? We're not really informed. And
Yeah.
then they get through all the entire process and like, well, do you have any questions? No, I don't have any questions. And of course the brand, even though they think that that could be a red flag, they're like, okay, great, fantastic, here's all the other things of why we're such a great brand you should invest in. And okay, let's sign. And where's your franchise fee? $50,000. Great. Then they open it up. They try to open up their franchise. All of a sudden, they're running into all these roadblocks. They're running into these legal obligations, and they're like, "Wait a minute, where's this coming from? Oh, it's there. we disclosed it to you in that, remember that document, FDD, which you actually signed a receipt that you acknowledge receiving it. It's all there. So what does that do? That leaves potential disputes, which then leads to litigation, which then leads to terminations, which then leads to people getting washed out of the system. But the interesting thing about that is that when they do wash out of the system, guess what? The brand has to report in their FDD all the terminations that happened in the prior year. So then you then start having a track record of your system declining versus growing. And then that and then imparts your, the perspective of whether you're a good franchisor or a bad franchisor, whether your system's strong, whether it's not or not. So it has all of these second and third order effects. So so as a result of this, if you could just produce engagement on this document, you were never able to do it. Why? Well, we lack the technology to be able to fully digitize and put an intelligence layer over this document to enable a digitized experience of it versus just a straight dumb PDF view. And what does that do? Well, that engagement allows us to, with the consent of the recipient of it, we're able to see for the first time, the things that matter to them, the topics that really need to be addressed, the things that can be proactively addressed.
Yeah.
Instead of waiting to talk to a real life person to ask a question that sales rep may not be actually have the background to answer fully. And also you may be getting inconsistent answers, right? Yeah. And it's, and if there's ever a litigation, the franchisee says, well, when I was being sold my franchise, Sally told me that I'd be making all my money back in 2 years.
Right.
What? Sally, where did she say that? Oh, she said it on a phone call, or she said it when we met at Starbucks, for our coffee meeting. Why? Well, sales reps are incentivized by commissions.
Right.
So there's all these human dynamics that the lack of ability to capture engagement, the traditional way of how the disclosure occurs, that we're just really ripe to build something with this engagement purpose in mind. And I think with technology, we now can do it.
I find it so fascinating, like where you're at the very beginning of like their franchisee journey, like before they even become a franchise owner, before they're a leader of anything.
Yeah.
Right. And it I don't know, I just find it super interesting, right? That moment looks very different before they sign this document and then after they sign this document, right? Where presumably everything changes, right? Because they're responsible for a whole lot more things than they were the moments before they did it.
That's right.
I think that I'm interested to know just, and this, maybe this is just kind of anecdotal, from your side, but when you have the franchisor and the franchisee or potential, I guess, franchisee, they're sizing each other up, I guess, right? They're both sides are making a bet on each other. What do you think they tend to sort of underestimate about the other in that window of time?
I think that there is the classic. I think there's the classic phrase that we as humans, we overestimate our ability to achieve something and underestimate the time that it's going to take.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Taking it from the view of both sides, right? Clearly, and it all depends on whether the brand is a very successful established brand versus an emerging brand and so forth. But you have this tension of, one, the prospective buyer who maybe has never owned their own business. They are looking for this exit, this point, this entryway into freedom, entrepreneurial freedom. They may have an interesting passion about maybe the concept, or maybe not. And they're looking to the franchisor to say, you're possibly that, you're the holder of that, because you've established some semblance of success. You've figured out how things work, how to operate your business successfully, and so forth. And I'm going to be depending on you, franchisor, to help me become successful. But then from the franchisor's perspective, they're saying, I want to pick you because I'm looking for certain attributes, the entrepreneurial sense of grit and so forth, that there's ups and downs. But the franchisor can never say, yeah, we've created the foolproof system here. We're basically a money-making machine. No, they're looking to that operator to figure it out themselves, to be able to manage people well, to be able to be an effective leader, to be able to deal with crisis, to be able to deal with anything that comes up in connection with running a successful business. And I think, going back to that adage, the prospect, the buyer, is overestimating how rock solid the so-called business in the box is, and they're underestimating their own need and effort to be able to make it successful. Right?
Yeah.
Oh, if I just follow the manual, I'll be successful. No, it's not like that. Right? And then on the franchisor side, they're doing the same, but it's the actual opposite. Right? Someone said this to me the other day, that franchising is not a quick rich scheme. Right? If you think that you're going to be the next Jimmy John's, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of growing pains. Figure out, how do you best support your franchisees who've put their money and livelihoods in your hands, and being able to nurture that, and be able to create this community. On the brand side, on the franchisee side, they're looking to these brands to potentially enable their success. But that, owning one unit is not a get rich scheme, quick rich scheme. But they have that freedom. So I think that, they're looking to these folks as potential leaders who have never been leaders before. They're almost looking to these brand as, well, you're already established leader, I'll just follow you, and all of the success will follow. No, actually, there's a disconnect there, right? And the issue there is, they're doing it imprecisely and sizing each other up. There's do you ever see the movie Moneyball?
Yeah, loved it.
Okay. Remember, Brad Pitt is basically, he's the general manager of the A's, and he's dealing with the scouts. And the scouts are saying, when they are meeting with a prospect, it's like, well, we've got 150 years of experience and expertise in the baseball industry. When we see a player, we know when we see it. He's got that intangible. When he walks in the room, everyone looks. He's got the swing. He's got this. He's got all the potential. And Brad Pitt's like saying, you don't know. You really don't know. So what can we go on? Probably more data, right? Yeah. Objective data to get a pinpointing of whether someone's going to be successful or not. It's an interesting mindset where, we are somewhat making judgments, like whether you're going to be my successful franchisee or not. In some ways, we're going on gut.
Yeah.
And if you're early enough, you're like, oh, you want in? Okay. Right.
Yeah.
And that's not, so either way, you're possibly
Yeah.
throwing the dart, but you're not really sure where it's going to land. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah. Does that
Yeah.
resonate?
100%.
Yeah.
100%. I want to
Yeah.
zoom out a little bit on AI. You're
Mm-hmm.
you're an attorney, you're a lawyer building AI tools. 5 years out, what is the day-to-day legal side of running a small business looks like? What should owners be doing now to get ready, right? We talked about the 60% who, and then we've talked about some AI enablement now, but what does it look like on a day-to-day for an SMB, on the legal side?
For for the client on the SMB, or you're talking about the attorney?
No, for the client, what does the business look like? The legal side of running a small business.
Yeah. I think it's primarily where they will be uh, somewhat self-service in terms of their own particular AI agents that are analyzing uh, analyzing their contracts, being able to provide some sort of general advisory service, and reaching out to the attorney when one it's something that AI can't do, whether it's like dispute resolution or something to that effect. But I think it's less reliance on uh, the traditional step one through step eight, meaning, hey, I've got this issue, I've got this contract. Let me email my attorney and get on the phone with him and talk to him or her, and hopefully, they'll get back to me in a week with whatever I'm asking for. I think it's going to be compressed. It's going to be they're going to be able to make the request easily. I think either they're having some sort of AI enablement on their side where uh, these agreements are being drafted, these agreements are being revised. It's then being sent off to their attorney if they so choose. It's an option, and the day-to-day interaction from a contract standpoint is going to be diminished. From a regulatory framework side, that's a little different just because regulations are constantly changing. So you have to be really up on that. Whether they will make the investment to do that, they may still choose to be working with an attorney regarding FDA labeling, right? Like labeling
Mm-hmm.
for their beverage or
Right,
whatever
right, right.
their product is. Some things will be untouched, but some things that I mentioned that are going to be commoditized are somewhat going to be handled on their side, more so than reaching out to their local small business attorney to review a contract. I think that's going away.
Um, that's good. First of all, for the one building this this type of stuff, um, I think that's really kind of good insight. It's I think it really kind of speaks to how I envision these changes to happen slowly and incrementally, right, over the next half decade or so. Obviously
Yeah.
things might look different, even different than that in 10 years or 20 years, but really over the next 5, I think you probably nailed it. Um,
Yeah.
you've talked a lot about catching problems before they leak. What's an early, and with franchising specifically, I think a lot of our listeners, our audience, are owners and operators are wearing 10 hats. They're franchisees. Some things get easier, some things get harder over the next decade, right? There's some areas where they're going to still continue to fly blind. And that's just reality of being an owner and operator, or like an HR of one, as we like to call them.
Yeah.
Um, what's an early warning sign in a franchise relationship, or I guess really any business relationship, that maybe owners miss until it's too late? And this might be a good one for an attorney to add some commentary on, but I'm just kind of curious, you know, sometimes problems, they percolate, right? And we don't see them until it's too late. I'm kind of curious what you've noticed as early warning signs to whatever these things might be.
Well, particularly when buying a franchise, one of the um, early warning signs, if you will, even though it's not necessarily, there's two things that stand out in my mind. Um, One, there's a section called Item 19, which basically the franchise has to present the financial representations of the business. And by the way, they can choose whatever metric they want to choose.
Yeah.
It's not standardized, right? So, and they don't have to disclose the entire business. They could say, well, if they have 100 units in their system, they could say, well, our item 19 covers 25% of those units. So it's almost like it could be viewed as cherry picking, right? Being able to understand, item 19, and also there's another exhibit in the FDD as to signed but not opened. What does that mean?
Yeah. What does that mean?
Well, it means that the franchise is actively selling, but their backlog of not opening up stores with their franchisees has built up. What does that? That's usually an indicator that they're selling too fast to support their existing backlog. And was
Mm.
that then possibly gets you into a place where you have outlaid the cash, but you're not getting the support from the system to
Yeah.
actually get you up and running, especially when it's brick and mortar franchises, right? It's
Yeah.
different. It's different if it's a home business, right? There's no real, usually those exhibits are, but if it's a brick and mortar business and you see a, signed but not opened, and it's like 120 signed but only 10 opened, you're like, when am I going to open? Because you
Yeah.
can only start
Exactly.
generating revenue once you're open.
Yeah. Yeah.
So those are some early signs, but particularly, lots of terminations or transfers out of the system. People are washing out. That means that there's something going on in the system. Either they're selecting bad franchisees, or there's disputes and so forth. So those things, I think, if you boil down of when you're considering buying a franchise, those are some of the things that we look at. Um, but with that said, and back to our issue of data, one of the reasons why we built FDD Hub is to be able to assist the prospect to surface those things. And then what does that do? It has the franchisor having to proactively discuss it. And that is about trust and transparency. And that's great for the system overall.
Yeah.
Because if,
100%.
just raises the
100%.
quality for the entire industry. And I think that's a good public good for what we're working on as well.
Yeah. I mean, it gets the folks on both sides engaged. Well, there you go. Back to the engagement, right? It gets them both engaged, but on a meaningful level where they're actually discussing, the actual content, right, inside of there that normally, like you said, I mean, somebody's not even going to spend the time to read or digest, 400 pages. So, I want to wrap up with this question. If a small business owner, an aspiring franchisee, were to come to you, and then perhaps this has already happened many times, but asks you or says, I want to build something on solid ground. I don't just want to get the deal done. Um, I want to feel supported. I want to feel like I'm doing it the right way and checking all my boxes and crossing my T's and dotting my I's. It's not just about signing, right? Because that's just the beginning. That's not the end. And I think a lot of people forget that when you start in franchising, the goal isn't just to sign on the dotted line, right? That's not the end. That's literally the beginning. So what's the single most important piece of advice that you give them?
Typically, that it's like a marriage. It's a long-term marriage, right? Your success is somewhat dependent on their success. Yeah, you're
In
trading on
both
their
directions,
right.
right?
You're trading on their brand. They're trading on your operational, your operational wherewithal. Um, so make sure that you have your eyes wide open. Often franchises, especially successful franchises, they're not going to change anything in that franchise agreement, and notoriously, it's one of the most one-sided
Yeah.
agreements in history. ever written, but it's there for a reason. And that is the trade-off, in order to be able to successfully saying, yeah, I know that if I'm operating a nothing bundt cake, I'm going to get people, right? Because I'm trading off of that reputation. So that in of itself is important. But I think the most important thing is, again, and we surface this in FDD Hub if they ask for it, ask who are other existing franchisees in your area or in your state. Call them, talk to them, get the skinny in terms of what's the real story. Are you happy? Are they supportive? Do they get back to you? How do they provide guidance? How have they helped you solve problems? Right. Because it's a collaborative relationship, because it's an interdependent relationship. Yeah. You have to make sure that the value is going to be given on the other side. So that's really important. Just don't talk to references that they give you.
Yeah. Right.
Go into another state, go into a city that's maybe different than yours. Maybe look at someone who's in a territory that you wouldn't think is doing well, and reach out to them. Right. And that to me is, and if they don't want to talk to you, well, that's another sign.
Yeah, so, exactly.
You're making one of the biggest investments in your life. So therefore, you should be well informed and educated the best that you can. And it's in the interest of the franchisor for you to be the best educated and informed and, quote, engaged as you can. Yeah. So hopefully, as we often say in FDD Hub, we're helping, franchisors identify better candidates, which turns into better discovery days. Those are the final sales event, which leads to stronger systems. And that's what you want. You want better candidates. You want people who are good at leading, good at being an entrepreneur, good at problem solving. So how can you surface that early on? But it's a two-way street. You need to be making sure you do your diligence on the brand that you're going to be marrying for 10 years at least.
Yeah.
So
I love that. I think that's sound advice. Thank you so much for joining me, Stephen. I really enjoyed the conversation. Yeah, I appreciate you having the time with us. And I want to thank all of you watching and listening to MustardHub Voices Behind the Build. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. Be sure to visit mustardhub.com to learn more about MustardHub and our AI predictive foresight and how we power behavioral workforce intelligence for the global workforce. Until next time.